So for those of you who don't know, we're fairly new to Mena. We've been here a little over a year. We came here from Central Texas. We we went empty nest crazy and bought half of the branding iron from my brother and moved here. And so all of a sudden we are restaurant people and living in the mountains, which we love. It's something new and different, and we were kind of ready to not be driving by the football stadium where we didn't have anybody playing football anymore, and not be going by the baseball fields where we no longer had little leaguers, and just new scenery. So that's what Mena is for us. So I was thinking about, Lance asked me quite a few months ago if I would sub for him today, and because he knew he was going to be gone. And so I've been thinking for a while about what I might talk about, but to be honest, I had some things in mind that I might talk about and this and that. I don't usually do Sunday morning church most places. I usually do the ladies' banquets and things like that. So I thought, well, maybe I'll bring something from that and the guys will just have to put up with it or whatever. But something came in my mail this week, and I really felt like it was a little God wink, a little message from God about what to speak about this week. And I'll give you just the 2-second rundown on why. Forgive me for using notes. These are kind of new ponderings because of what came in the mail this week. I'll give you a little rundown of why this came in the mail. When you're in the book business, I write books for a living, and when you're and have for a lot of years. When you're in the book business, there's this thing that happens because you know a lot of other authors. There's a little thing that book publishers do when a book comes out. They send books in the mail to people the author knows, and so you get all these books in the mail from other authors and from their publishers, and it comes with a little kind of like a baby birth announcement type thing that says, this is a new book we have out, and we know you know the author, and so, we're sending you a copy, and we hope you'll tell people if you like it. So I usually get a couple books in the mail a week, but one came this week, and the reason I know it has to just have been a little God wink is because of the book it is. It's called The Book of Joy, and I am pretty sure I do not know either of the authors, because if I had ever met the Dalai Lama or the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I think I would remember that. So I don't know why this book came to me, except I think it was just because, Lance talked about love last week, and I thought, when this came, I thought, what's a perfect follow-up to that than to talk about that next fruit of the Spirit, joy. So the verse I picked was 1 Thessalonians. You'll see it in your bulletin. But always be joyful, never stop praying, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18. And I think this verse says a lot after that sermon last week, which touched me so deeply about being a love-driven Christian and having a love-driven faith and not a fear-driven faith, and being a love-driven church and not a fear-driven church. But when I read this verse, it's always been one of those that I look at, and I think a lot of people look at it and think, that is just not possible. Joyful all the time, no matter what the circumstances are. I think a lot of us look at it and think, that's a great idea, but it's just not doable. I can't do it. It's not possible. But then, I was thinking on this week about this, and I was thinking, but Jesus says, through God, all things are possible. So if Jesus says all things are possible, then who is it who's in our minds saying, this joy thing, this being joyful in all circumstances, this is impossible? Who is it who's in our minds saying that? Because there's a thief in our minds, and the thief wants us to believe that we can't be anything more than a mirror of the world around us, than a mirror of the other people we hear talking, than a mirror of the things we see on TV. We can't be anything better than that. We can't be anything more than that. And that thief has some pretty effective tools that he uses to convince us of all of this. And I think one of the ways we can fight against that, we can become better than just a mirror of what we're seeing around us, is to identify those tools and really look at them and recognize them when they're coming at us. And there are many. I just picked out a few this morning that really kind of affect me, or that are some of the main ones I think I have to battle against in this battle for remaining joyful and remaining upbeat and remaining positive about things. But I think it applies to anybody, no matter whether you're at home with your family all week, or whether you're in high school, or whether you're at the Senior Citizen Center. I think we all need to learn to recognize those tools that the joy thief wants to use to take away this continual joy in spite of circumstances that we're supposed to have. And I've spent a lot of time studying people because part of the reason you end up writing stories about people is just because you're interested in people and the way they are and what makes people tick. And so I spent a lot of time studying these people whose default needle seems to be set on joy, and the people who are somewhere in the middle, which is me, and the people who are kind of on the other side. They don't ever seem very joyful, or it's definitely not their default mode. I kind of come from a family, not all of them, but they're kind of more over here. A lot of our family dinners tend to be complaint sessions when we have holidays. So I've really looked at this over time. What do these joyful people have? How do they do it? What tools, what do they fight against? What are they not susceptible to? And I'm not talking about, just to disclaim it, I'm not talking about clinical depression, because that's a whole different medical, physical, chemical issue that has to be treated before you can look at what habits are we falling into that maybe make us less than joyful. One of the tools the joy thief uses is isolation, and that's really a common one in our world today. And you wouldn't think it, because we live in this world with instant communication, where we can keep up with our family members who live far away, and we can make friends with people on the other side of the world we've never met, and we can do all these things. But yet, all the studies show that people now report higher levels of loneliness than they ever have. How is that possible? But I think about it, and I think it's possible because I remember a different world. I remember how the world used to be when I grew up. And when I grew up, almost everything you did in a day involved face-to-face human communication. If you went to get some money from the bank, and it was usually communication with someone you knew and who knew you. So you'd visit a little bit about what was going on, or how's your grandma doing who was in the hospital, or whatever. The grocery store. I can remember getting excited, y'all, to go for gas. When we drove across that little black thing at the Texaco and the bell would go ding ding, my heart would just quicken, because I knew that Bill the Texaco man was going to come out. And he would ask how we were doing in school, and he would talk about how much we'd grown, and he had lollipops in his pocket, and he knew what color we all liked. Bill the Texaco man was the first guy I ever fell in love with besides my daddy. But can you contrast that to today, and can you imagine getting excited about going for gas now? What's exciting? Put your credit card in, you get gas, you pull your credit card out. What's exciting about that? Nothing. And if you have to go inside and talk to somebody, you are mad because the credit card reader did not work. That's the world we live in now. That's how different things are. We have become a culture of these people who have cyber communication or no communication, and we don't have this real two-way communication, yet we're made for that. Yet God made us to need that. And so people are reporting loneliness and depression because they don't have those close relationships in their life. They've studied this, and they studied where people used to have about 12 close contacts a day. Now they have usually less than 2 close contact communications with people on average. And they've studied, and they said you need about 5, at least, close contact people in your life who you talk to regularly to really be healthy and happy. I looked on our church Facebook page because I thought, let's look at how we're doing. And so I pulled a few things from the Facebook page, a few comments people had left. And I'm not going to name names because I didn't ask anybody for permission, but this is from the CCF Facebook page. I've never been a person who got excited about going to church, but since becoming a charter member of CCF, I can't wait for Sundays to arrive so I can go. I have made new friends from people I have known for many years. So you know what that is? That's the power of that face-to-face communication. That's the power of food and fellowship and taking the time to really talk to and get to know people that you've maybe brushed by, hi, how are you, fine, for years. So that is something we're doing right. Joy, thief of isolation, get thee behind us, because we have food and fellowship and time to talk first thing in the morning on Sundays when we get here. Number 2, I think, and one of the ones I see a lot is negative company. Fellowship is great, but negativity has become this form of entertainment in our culture. And having the restaurant, we work with a lot of young people, and we see how saturated they are with, the media and Facebook and negativity and people criticizing each other on Facebook. And, and they're talking all the time about who's going to get kicked out of the bachelor pad or thrown off the island or whatever. And we're saturated with this negativity. Complaining has become a way of life. But the thing is that complaining is the lowest form of human communication. It takes no creativity to complain. It takes no imagination to complain. As Lance says, any fool can point out a problem, and most fools do. It's true, though. And as proof, I submit to you the story of the road trip rule. So some years ago, we went on I had to go to a conference in Lake Tahoe area, Northern California. And so I thought, well, I'll take my mom and the kids. We have 2 boys. They're about 4.5 years apart in age. They're grown now. Anyway, so I thought, well, I'll take the boys. And they were freshmen, going into freshman year of high school and about 5th grade then. So we start off on this. We flew into Vegas. We're going to drive up through California, see the mountains, see the countryside. It's going to be this wonderful trip. So I ended up cooped up in a minivan with my youngest child, who's really kind of a default needle joy person, and my oldest child, who had suddenly become a teenager that year, just all of a sudden. And it ended, there was just all this, complaining and criticism and picking on his brother, and then the little one would cry, and it was miserable. It was like being trapped in a minivan with a jackal, y'all. It was awful. So it ended with, in a random hardware store in Northern California, with me saying to my older son, I wish I hadn't even brought you on this vacation. I don't want to feel that way, but I do. And then, of course, he cried, and it was not a Mother of the Year moment, I promise you. But we instituted the road trip rule, which we sometimes use at the restaurant, and we used on all of our family vacations from then on. The road trip rule said, and I said to them, all right, the next person who says something negative about somebody, about something, or whatever, has to pay back with 2 positive comments. And I thought, this will be great. Well, they'll have to think of all these positive things about each other and about what we're doing. Guess what happened? Utter silence. Quietest vacation we've ever had. Why? It was too much work for them to create these positive things to say. And we've had the same experience. We've used it on youth trips and all kinds of things. We always have the same experience. People would rather shut up than have to try to think of positive things to say, because talking about ideas and dreams and what's good takes some imagination. It takes some creativity. But it's also what joyful people do. And here's the thing, joyful people are like magnets. They attract people to them. So if we can be joyful here, and we can go out into the world and talk about positive things, and talk about what makes us joyful, and talk about how we're joyful in this church, we are going to attract people to us, and we are going to attract people to this church. It takes a little more effort sometimes to take a negative conversation and turn it positive, but we can do it. I mean, God says we can do all things. Joy is an incredibly powerful force. So I pulled this from the Facebook page. I'm so happy and excited to be a part of this wonderful group of upbeat people. That's what's going to make this church grow. The fact that the default setting in our church is upbeat, is joyful. Another tool the joy thief uses, getting us to believe the worst case scenario about things. My grandmother used to say, the world gives you a lot of what you expect from it. If we dine on a steady diet of what's available in the media, in the world, what we see on TV, then yeah, we're going to feel like, the world is terrible, everything is falling apart, there is nothing to be joyful about. We're going to be pretty down on people. And, and it's not that there aren't big problems in the world. There are big problems in the world. One of the best answers, though, that I ever had to that was I may have said last time, we taught the high school seniors for years in Sunday school. And so one day we were doing a thing where they had a little chart, and it was a little continuum graph, and they were supposed to mark how they felt on it. And so on one side it said, I think the world is mostly bad, and on the other side it said, I think the world is mostly good. And so they fell all along the continuum, and so we went around the circle, and I said, tell us why you justify your position for where you put your mark. And, so they, people kill people, there are terrorists, and, so they had their reasons. And one of them said, and his was way over on, and he was one of those joy people, his was way over on the world is basically good. And he said, if you watch the news and things, and you would think the world is basically bad because people kill people and terrorists do awful things and all that. He said, but, if you go out and drive around, you see mostly good people doing good things. You hardly ever see bad people doing bad things, and you definitely see way more good people just doing good things. And I thought, that is brilliant. That is true. We need to register not by, some of how we feel about things depends on what we look at, because what we focus on gets bigger. What we focus on becomes our biggest truth. And so we need to make sure we're focusing on what God wants us to focus on, not what the thief wants us to see. The thief wants us to see that everything is bad and life is terrible, and because that way the thief can keep us from being joyful, from being attractive. That way the thief can turn us into people who nobody really wants to know. A quick example of that, I was reading this week. I was doing some book research. This is going to require the old people glasses. Hang on. So I was doing some book research, and I was reading this little memoir, and this part really struck me. From 40th and Allen, we were sent to Camp Shelby in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. While we were there one night, a sentry shot a man off our water tower. He had a small package with him that contained arsenic. We were told not to use the water until they checked it to make sure it was okay to use. Doesn't that sound like a lot of the stuff we hear on the news? Act of terrorism, right? The thing is, that's a memoir from a man who went to World War I. So, there are terrible things happening in the world. There have always been terrible things that happen in the world. There have always been some number of bad people who do bad things. I was also studying the Depression recently for a book, and I'm looking at a lot of the photos that for one thing, it gave me an appreciation of how bad the worst of times really look, because those were the worst of times. But I was looking at photos that the WPA photographers took. They sent hundreds of photographers out to just take photos of ordinary life. And so I was looking at photos, and I'm looking at a photo of a woman and a little girl in Appalachia, just kind of standing on a bald, barren hillside, an old woman and about a 10-year-old girl. And the caption under this photo said, the woman's name, whatever it is, was, whose granddaughter is dying of malnutrition. Now, can you imagine? The photographer who's taking this picture knows this little girl is dying of malnutrition. The grandmother who's standing beside her knows she is dying of malnutrition, and they do not have the power to do anything about it. You know, it's not that we don't have hunger issues in this country, but when's the last time you ever knew someone was dying of malnutrition in this country and couldn't do anything about it? So, you know, are these the worst of times? They're not the worst of times. They're just times. They're times, and they come with their own set of challenges, and we have to keep that in perspective so we are not the people out there walking around sounding like Eeyore, you know, everything is awful, the world has gone to pot, we'll never get any better, you know, because then who are we going to attract to our church? Who are we going to attract to Christ? Who is going to come to Christ through us if that's the people we are? Another thing that I think the joy thief uses, and especially on people like me who like to control stuff and like to have everything just, you know, I like for things to go my way, are circumstances that are beyond our control. When things aren't turning out the way we think they should in the world, in politics, in our lives, in our jobs, in our health, or whatever. When we don't feel joyful about some things, just because we don't like everything, does that mean there's nothing to be joyful about? The number one thing about people whose default needle is set on joy, and there's some studies about this too, is that they look for little joys even in adverse situations. They bounce back very quickly as a result of that. They're very resilient. They come back from big disappointments because they're always picking up on little joys in the situations that they experience. They know they don't have to be happy about everything to be happy about something. And even on the worst days, our Father does tell us that we need to focus on what's right and pure and holy and praiseworthy and lovely. And if that sounds like Scripture, it's because it's Philippians 4:8. But there's a lot of power in that. You know, focus on what's right and beautiful and pure and holy. And an illustration for me comes from one of the most upside down and worst days I can remember in my life. And I asked Sam if I told you guys this story last time, and I hope I didn't because he says I didn't. So if you did hear it last time, just nod and act like you haven't heard it before. So when my first book came out in 2000, it came out in the summer of 2000, and it was a very exciting time, and lots of good things were happening with the book. And it was the stories in it were my grandmother's real stories. I think I did tell you that last time. And she had died a few months before that, so it was, it was a testament to her. It was a very special story for me. So we were going to go do this toward fall. This exciting thing was going to happen. We were going to go to Dallas and be on Good Morning Texas on TV. And they wanted to meet, we were all going to meet at a bed and breakfast, and we were going to have some friends come in, and the friends were coming in, some from Dallas and some from Central Texas, and some from the town we were living in then, and some from the hill country, and we were all going to go to Dallas, and they were going to pretend like they were a book club that met together all the time. And TV, they were going to film this book club discussion of the book, and it was going to be on Good Morning Texas. So we were rushing around in the morning. We were waiting for the friends from down in the hill country to come to our house. We were going to go to town and meet the friends in town. We were all going to caravan to Dallas and meet the other friends at the bed and breakfast in Dallas. So it was this very exciting morning. We're getting dressed. We had all gone out and bought new clothes to be on TV and everything. And so we were just bubbling over with excitement. And we got a call from the producer. And the producer said, "Don't come. A plane has hit the World Trade Center. We're sending our people to New York. We don't know what's happened, but you might want to turn on your TV." So we turned on our TV, and of course, about the time we did that, the second plane hit, and we realized this is not a small commuter plane, an accident. Something really awful has happened. And I remember the people from down in the hill country pulling into my driveway then, and I walked out, and they got out of the car, and they were smiling, and I thought, they don't know. I'm going to have to drop the bomb on them because they've been driving and they don't know what's happened. And so I told them what had happened, and everybody just wanted to go, back home. You just didn't know what to do but go home. And so they left, and I remember walking them back out the door, and it was this beautiful morning. It was this beautiful, sky a million miles wide, gorgeous morning. And I just remember thinking, the day shouldn't even look like that with everything that's gone on. It shouldn't look like that because this is an awful day. And so I thought about going and getting my kids from school, but I didn't. I let them finish the day. I went to pick them up at the end of the school day. And I was driving through our town, and I was stopped at the light by the little ballet studio, and there were parents on the sidewalk, and they were talking, and you could tell, it looked very grim, and everybody had their heads together, and you knew what they were talking about. And then there were these 3 little girls down the sidewalk, and they had their little pink tutus on, and their little hair up, and they had their little hands in the air, and they were just twirling in the sunlight down the sidewalk. And the first thing I thought when I looked at them is, oh, that's terrible. Their parents should stop them. This is, this awful thing has happened, and all these people are dead, and the world will never be the same, and it's the end of the world, and somebody should stop them from doing that. And then I remembered a story that my grandmother told me about Pearl Harbor Day. They lived out in the country, and so they didn't know about Pearl Harbor ahead of time till they heard it on the radio. They heard Roosevelt's address on the radio, and they were listening to it, and she said, "I heard my kids playing out in the yard, and while they were listening to the radio address, this is a day that will live in infamy and all that." And she said, "I thought, oh, they shouldn't be doing that, not today, this is the end of the world. They shouldn't be out there laughing and carrying on." And she said, "I got up and I marched across the living room, and I was very angry." And she said, "I got to the door, and she said, I just stopped and I stood there. And I thought, no, this is the one thing that's right about this day. This is where God is in this day. And yes, some awful people have done awful things, but this is proof that this is still God's world." And she said, "I just stood there and I just watched my kids play and felt the joy because they could do that." And I think that's who we have to be. That's who I beg you guys to be as a church. Don't let the joy thief in. Don't let the joy thief ruin you or ruin the church body. Just say no. It's a poison. It's spiritual poison. It's mental poison. It's physical poison. Negativity is the worst thing we can take in and pass on. That thief really does want to make Christians look like nobody you'd ever want to hang out with. Because why? Because then nobody will want to hang out with us. Nobody will come to our church. Nobody will come to Christ through us. If we are those negative people who are complaining about the world, who have all these negative things to say, then we lose our most powerful attraction, which is showing that this church, that our relationship with Christ, that our faith gives us joy in spite of what's going on in the world. Can we be bigger than the circumstances around us? Can we be more than that mirror of the world around us? Yeah, we can. It is possible. We can speak the language of blessing over our lives and the world and our community, and not the language of poverty.